Michal. These are just some of the women harassed, abused, and misunderstood because of their beauty or gender or status. This has been around and is recorded in our most ancient, sacred Jewish texts. Good evening and welcome to you all. I am Debbie Cosgrove, the president of the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York. I know I speak on behalf of everyone in the room. We're really thrilled to see each and every one of you here. And I just have to give a shout out to the men in the room. Thank you. We know this is an issue for our entire community. The Jewish Women's Foundation of New York imagines a world in which all women and girls have equal opportunity for economic, religious, social, and political achievement. And we work to make this world a reality by providing education on vital issues, funding innovative programs, and engaging in advocacy efforts like this. The reason we created tonight's event was because we have seen through our involvement with harassment prevention and awareness dating back many years that the Jewish community is not immune. And we thought it was important for the broader community to have the opportunity to learn about the depth of this problem in the Jewish communal world. That is abuse and harassment between Jewish communal professionals and between our professionals and volunteers and donors. We are all struggling, personally and communally, with how to respond, what actions to take, and how to raise and lift up our voices. And tonight we will. We will hear and bear witness to the stories of many individuals in our community who have experienced harassment. A thank you to those of you who have come forward and bravely submitted your stories. These stories will be read by other people tonight, from our most talented performers and inspiring speakers who have generously given of their time. And after that, we are honored to have Barbara Dopkin facilitate a panel where we can have our questions answered and take individual and collective action to catalyze change in our community. So you'll note in your programs that there are rules of engagement, and I want to highlight a couple of them. The purpose of this event tonight is to examine experiences specifically in the Jewish communal space, inside of traditional workplaces and the field. It is not for personal experiences in other spaces. To define some terms tonight, we will use gender abuse and gender harassment instead of sexual abuse and harassment. The word sex seems to confuse people, and this is about the abuse of power based on gender and about the power imbalance that exists in that relationship. The event is not intended as a platform to name and shame, although we recognize that this is important for some people. In the program and on our website are resources for those who wish to pursue this. And this event is not to provide structured survivor support. Again, we will be able to point participants toward those resources, but tonight is focusing on learning and future-focused change-making. And lastly, please silence your cell phones. Before we move forward, I'm going to ask you to take a moment, you can close your eyes, and pause and think about what your expectations were when you signed up for tonight's event. Because now I'm going to ask you to set aside those expectations and just be here in the room to listen, to feel, to strategize, and to hope. I'd like to invite Naomi Les to ritualize this moment.
Take a moment, as Debbie suggested, to let those expectations fly away and be in the here and now. A lot of things brought us to this moment. A lot of pain brought us to this moment. A lot of abuse brought us to this moment. And so we're going to bless whatever brought us here. Not that it was good that it happened, but thank goodness we are here now together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Ruach haolam שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו רוח העולם שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה, לזמן הזה, לזמן הזה, לזמן הזה.
The incidents that occurred were mostly with our partners.
The incidents that occurred were mostly with board members.
The incidents that occurred were mostly with donors.
The incidents that occurred were mostly with colleagues.
I was told it was part of the job. Lazman hazeh, Lazman hazeh, Lazman hazeh, Lazman hazeh.
I had a boss who made weird jokes about going to the bathroom with me.
I had a boss who told me that he loved me at the end of every meeting.
I had a boss who massaged my shoulders while I was working.
I had a boss who liked to have public conversations about my sex life.
I had a boss who made comments about my body to board members in front of me.
Jewish organizations are often small and informal, which gives the impression that people can interact in a more casual manner, sometimes crossing a line.
There is often a weird blurring of social and professional situations that occur in Jewish communal organizations, and it makes sexual harassment more difficult to address. I'm sure both men who harassed me have completely forgotten about what happened. Wish I could.
Boundaries are confusing when working for Jewish organizations. Are we family, professional colleagues? Do we date within the organization or the volunteers? What's appropriate? What's inappropriate? Part of what makes it fun to work in the Jewish community is the familiarity and the intimacy. But that can also be very, very challenging, if not a slippery slope.
I'm on the bima at the high holidays. A member of the congregation remarks, "Don't you think that skirt's a little short for a rabbi?"
I'm on the bima, and the rabbi whispers in my ear, "I like your pants that tight."
After I gave birth to my first baby, the senior rabbi asked me to twirl around so he could see how my body was bouncing back from birth.
Our rabbi shares and comments at the body of his secretary. He is smitten with her physical looks and makes it known. The entire office finds this very awkward.
Sexual harassment is common, but microaggressions are even more prevalent, including commenting on a female rabbi's clothing, skirt length, proportion of skin covered, heel height, shoe type, hairstyle, parental status, maternity leave.
Inappropriate comments from donors and lay leaders about my body, relationship status, dating life, marriage, being asked out by donors in work settings, overhearing demeaning commentary about women's appearance and sexuality in the workplace, being inappropriately touched, My supervisor expressed empathy, but any instances with donors or lay leaders were shrugged off or defended.
After pretending to have a lascivious phone call with another Jewish organizational leader about having three-way sex, my boss, who was also my board chair, put his head in my lap in the car on the way to a fundraising meeting.
He was overly intimate, making inappropriate comments, calling me baby, honey, telling me I had a husky voice from a cold, that I sound sexy.
I was told it's part of the job.
Lazman hazeh. Join you. Lazman hazeh. Lazman hazeh. Lazman hazeh.
The sexual harassment during rabbinical school was a semester-long nightmare. The professor made consistent sexual jokes and flirtations, and once had pornographic images up on his computer that were easily visible to more than just him. He asked what it would take for me to date him. I tried to dodge the question he persisted in asking. So I started by changing the way I dressed for class, wearing bulky clothing to draw attention away from me. At the end of the semester, once my grade was submitted, I did file a formal complaint internally in the school. The school handled the case appropriately. It went through their formal process, and the accused was found liable for his actions and was no longer able to teach independent studies. He was also removed from the core curriculum, though he could still teach elective classes. While I was heartened by the supportive response I received, sadly, it was clear that this man was widely known for these behaviors for decades.
The prospective donor for my small nonprofit explicitly propositioned me for sex over an afternoon meeting to discuss strategy for the nonprofit.
I was propositioned by a married man who had supervised me in an internship while I was in my graduate studies.
I was propositioned by a married donor I was professionally courting, who ran his company's philanthropic giving.
My congregant didn't drive, and neither did her husband. When this elderly couple hosted me for dinner on my monthly visits to their isolated, semi-rural congregation, it meant I would pick them up at their home in my rental car, drive them to a nearby restaurant at which they would pay for the meal, and I would drive them back home. Things already didn't feel comfortable when I walked into their home to learn that the husband was still getting ready. I walked past their room to get to the only bathroom in the one-level home. He left the door open and was in his boxer shorts, looking straight into the hallway. Was this intentional? I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, but I felt vulnerable and extremely uncomfortable. I was serving as a rabbinic intern, not yet ordained. I had absolutely zero experience in teaching folks in older generations than myself in a religious or a spiritual setting. Was this simply an innocent accident? After dinner, the husband and I helped my congregant into the rental car I was driving to the restaurant. We were then standing on the same side of the car together in the cold, while the wife sat snugly inside. There was almost no space between the car and the house, and our bodies were uncomfortably close together. Then the husband told me a joke. My brain has simply not allowed me to remember the details of the so-called joke, but I do remember that the punchline was about a woman being raped in a rental car. Stunned and shocked, I said absolutely nothing. We got into the car. I refused to help him and let him struggle, though he was certainly elderly and somewhat weak. But in that moment, I felt like he had claimed all the power and left me with nothing. Was he threatening me directly or indirectly with rape or assault?
I have been hit on by many prospects, lay leaders, congregants, and a couple of colleagues. Sometimes I told my superiors. Their response was to ask me not to meet with the culprits.
I was told it's part of the job.
Lazman hazeh. Lazman hazeh. Lazman hazeh. Lazman hazeh.
My boss in Israel said he didn't realize it was out of place when he stuck his tongue in my mouth. In his going away speech, he thanked me in front of hundreds of people who had no idea what he was talking about for educating him in the ways of American feminism.
My boss would only act up when we traveled on business. All the female employees would play musical chairs to not end up seated next to him on flights or at events. It was annoying, but I think we knew that he wouldn't take it further unless we gave him an opening. And yes, this was at progressive organizations that were all about fighting for human rights.
As a young social worker in a Jewish-affiliated hospital, I was honored to be asked to present a case at one of the hospital's grand rounds. I needed an article in order to complete my presentation. I asked the department head, an eminent mental health professional, if I could stop by to pick up the article. He said I could come by at 5 p.m. When I arrived at his office, he closed the door, grabbed me, began kissing me. When I asked him to stop, he did, stating, "Whenever a man asks you to his office at 5 p.m., this is what's expected."
Overly intimate touching, scratching from the base of my neck, my back upward. I didn't know who it was at first, and I thought it was my husband because of the nature of the touch. Turned out it was a congregant. I changed my behavior, made sure I wasn't alone with the person who kissed me for too long. I controlled the hugs.
I've had a donor or two place their hand on my thigh, comment on my appearance in totally inappropriate ways. I'm ashamed to say, but you kind of just get used to it.
My butt was patted by the president of the congregation on the bima during a job interview a few years ago. I called him on it. He flatly denied doing it. I wasn't going to work there, so I let it go.
The summer of my senior year at Brandeis, I interned with a rabbi of a small synagogue. As we were curating his papers, we mostly worked out of his apartment. One day, he called and invited me to use his wife's ticket to Mozart. We met at the Philharmonic, but soon I sensed that something was different, wrong. He took my hand. He looked at me with nostrils flaring. I sat through the concert thinking, I must be imagining this. But when we got into his car, he tried to kiss me. I pushed him away. He said, "Let's go back to my apartment and talk. My wife is there." I assumed that meant it would be safe, so I went. When we got there, I greeted his wife in the kitchen. The rabbi directed me to his study. As I always did, I took a seat on the couch. He came in and stood in front of me, unzipped his pants, and asked me to give him oral sex. I bolted out of there immediately. I was in shock and ashamed, thinking it was my fault somehow, but I knew something had to be done. I spoke to the New York Board of Rabbis, who said they knew about his behavior, but could do nothing. Maybe he wasn't really a rabbi, they said, as he told them his papers were destroyed in Europe. They thanked me for being so courageous and for speaking up. I told my story to a New York newspaper, but they said I needed more women to come forward before they could print it. After I graduated, I called him and I asked him to meet me. Of course, he didn't know why. I chose a neutral space. When I reminded him what had transpired, asking only for his acknowledgement, he said that he had never had intercourse with any women besides his wife. He said he did not remember, but that since I remembered in such detail, it must be true. I told him that one doesn't have to have intercourse to violate a woman.
He hugs too close, smells my hair, lingers just a little too long. I've learned to just box out my space when I'm around him. I received a call from a colleague about him a year and a half ago, describing the same behavior. I feel ashamed, but
I told her it's part of the job.
Lazman hazeh. Lazman hazeh. Lazman hazeh. Lazman hazeh. When I was young and there were inappropriate comments, I didn't do anything. These men just seemed simple-minded to me, and I definitely was worried about compromising my job. Later in life, I realized that these comments were inappropriate. When I was young, I didn't know that this is not the way to be spoken to in a work environment.
Until recently, I had no idea that this was, in fact, harassment. I thought this was just the cost of being a woman in the workplace.
I didn't do anything. I wish I had. I was 26 years old and scared. Now I know better.
I just sucked it up. You know, men of a certain generation.
There seems to be a pass for older employees, either by individuals or the organization, or both. I think the attitude is, he's from another time. He doesn't understand that behavior is harassment. Nothing is meant by it, but it's been going on a long time. These men were young ones.
Do men of a certain age or background simply not know what can make someone feel unsafe? I find that really hard to believe. Maybe they need to be taught.
In my organization, staff and board members generally have positive and open relationships. So when I shared with a new board member that I'm a lesbian and married to a woman, he started to ask incredibly invasive questions about my romantic life. As someone with lots of lesbian friends, he really wanted to know if I thought lesbians could actually be monogamous, and kept asking me if I was in a monogamous relationship. He asked for details about my relationship that were really uncomfortable for me because so many of them bordered on having sexual undertones. His questions lead me to question.
Why do I question if LGBT bias is harassment?
Why do I question if gender bias is harassment?
Why do I question if racial bias is harassment?
Why do I question myself?
Why do they not question?
Lazman hazeh. Lazman hazeh. Lazman hazeh. Lazman hazeh.
We are not protecting our young women.
I am not protected.
We are not protecting our young men.
I am not protected.
At the age of 23, I was starting my second job out of college. It wasn't too long after I began working at the Jewish institution that I realized I wasn't just hired because I was a well-educated individual with a strong resume. I was hired because my supervisor found me attractive. He saw me as someone who could easily be taken advantage of in the workplace. During the 11 months I stayed at that job, he would compliment my looks and ask that I dress a certain way. He wanted me to know that he was open and free in his life. He wanted to discuss masturbating and how sex gave him such a release. He wanted me to know that if I masturbated, it would be self-stimulation and a form of being gay, which he is okay with as another man. He would tell me to join him for dinner and suggest I look for a new job if I declined, but I stayed quiet. I didn't want to report his actions or how uncomfortable I was because he was a, quote, straight, happily married, Orthodox man. I didn't want to be the person who ruined a family's reputation or embarrasses children.
What do you do when you are a man looking to advance your career and a woman in a position of power flirts with you? What if she flirts a lot? What if, as you are discussing possible senior positions within her organization, she is making highly sexual suggestions? What if, when you are traveling together to a conference where your current organization is pitching something to her organization, she spends dinner telling you why she believes that our culture has it backwards when it comes to cheating on your spouse? Cheating would make arranged marriages so much better for everyone, she says. What if, when she does hire you, career advancement complete, she continues to send sexually descriptive texts? What if at a meeting with the board members from all over the community, she walks up and whispers in your ear things that might have made a sailor blush? I know this is an issue that women have been dealing with for many, many, many years. But then it happened to me, and I understood. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a sexual harassment expert now. I only know what it's like to be harassed once. I don't pretend to know what it's like to be sexually harassed at multiple places of employment and by multiple people over a span of multiple years. It happened only once to me, and I have been struggling with it ever since. I didn't speak out as it happened. I wanted the job. I wanted my career to move to the next level. I desired bigger and better things, and she had the power to give it to me. I wasn't interested in her. Seriously, I wasn't. Even now, I feel like I need to say it. It's so sad. But I wanted the job, and it was happening, and I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell anyone about the text messages or the emails or what she whispered to me during the board meeting. I cringe every time I think about that moment. Who could I tell? Why would I tell? I wanted this job. Plus, how could I, a man, be sexually harassed by a woman? The job didn't last. Within a week and a half of taking the job, I was in therapy. Within a month and a half, I was looking for a new job. And just over 4 months after my first day, I was out of there. As I packed up my office, the director of HR came in to ask if there was anything I wanted to talk about. I told her in sleazy detail what my boss had done. And then I told the HR director that I wasn't going to sue, but that it was important that HR know that this took place. And then I picked up my box of stuff that had lived in that office for just over 4 months, 4 awful, sad months. I didn't write it up. I didn't shout it from the rooftop. I said it as I walked out the door. I was unemployed for just over 2 weeks and landed at an organization that I love with an incredibly rewarding job. I am keenly aware that in this sense, I am one of the lucky ones. For the 4 months I worked there, I was depressed. I started questioning my ability to do the work. After I left and started my new position, I wasn't sure I could handle it. I wondered if the problem wasn't what happened with her, but rather if I was just unqualified to do the work. My self-esteem was at an all-time low. I walked into my new job wondering if I was strong enough or capable enough. I have struggled mightily to write the story, but not because I'm embarrassed that it happened. No, I am embarrassed that I didn't do anything to make sure she couldn't do it to anyone else. Even now, as I tell the story, I am shaking and sweating. No names, the organization unknown. For all you know, it was a made-up story to prove some point that is only in my head. It's not made up, really. It is rarely made up. Ask your wife or sister or mom or a woman in the coffee shop near you. I also feel compelled to say that this is not my attempt to say, see, it's not just men who harass. I am keenly aware that for me this was a one-time event. For most women, straight women, lesbians, women of color, women without power, it is a lifetime trend. I simply wish I had spoken up. I wish I could do more fully now. Mostly, I hope that the events of last year or so will make it stop. Sadly, I suspect that more stories are on the way.
I still get innuendo, as recently as a few weeks ago, from someone whose mentorship has been very important in my professional growth. I try to ignore it, and haven't felt the cost of confrontation outweigh the learning. Sadly, I can't say I'm proud of that.
I spent many years working at my Jewish overnight camp. When I became a senior staff member, I had staff members share their experiences of sexual assault with me, committed by another staff member. When I went to discuss this with the director, I was told that their hands were tied and that nothing could be done about the situation.
I didn't tell anyone. There were congregants at a community function being a bit handsy. I didn't see any good coming from it, especially since I'd only been on the job for a few months. But now I'm mindful of how close I stand to people when alcohol is involved, and I won't meet with people in my office after hours.
I told our director about my experiences, and he shrugged them off, saying, I spoke to him, and he said he's sorry. There was never a formal apology, nor did he get written up.
There's a problematic dynamic between board and staff when there is a tendency for lay leaders and donors to engage in inappropriate behavior or comments that are tolerated for the benefit of the organization. This often leaves staff feeling unprotected.
The board chair of a partner organization asked me to have a lunch meeting. After lunch, he asked me to walk and continue our talk. We sat on a bench, and he tried to kiss me. I turned my head, said goodbye, and ran back to my office in tears. The next day, he sent me a threatening email. I told my board members and the executive director of his organization. The other ED, a former mentor of mine, encouraged me to tell him off, but she never said or did anything.
I filed a formal sexual harassment complaint with the school against a very respected professor. One time, he asked me to sit in the front row and unbutton the top buttons of my blouse. Another time, he cornered me in a stairwell and started kissing me and putting his hands on me. He only stopped because someone else came in. And those are only 2 examples. But after I filed the complaint, nothing happened. Except I failed his class. So I filed a complaint with the police. He fled the country. Everyone lauds him for making Aliyah. And I still see his name as a keynote speaker at conferences.
Who else had these experiences?
Who else was harmed because I didn't want to make waves?
Who else found no support?
Who else felt betrayed?
Who else will never wear fishnet stockings to a work event?
While people agree that it shouldn't have happened, nothing was done about it either.
When I spoke up, my coworker denied it. People were upset with me. It was awful.
I'm not coming forward. I saw how he ruined her career.
I was told it's part of the job.
Lazman hazeh, Lazman hazeh, Lazman hazeh, Lazman hazeh.
One donor put his hand high on my thigh, leaned in, and told me he liked my tights.
One donor told me he would give if I came to a gala with him. When I didn't go, he actually wouldn't give because he thought I knew it was an exchange. He told me flat out that he was interested in dating me, and donations would be contingent on my responsiveness.
One donor, old enough to be my father, told me, I wanted to meet with you to hear about your work, but I also feel about you how a man does about a woman.
One donor, old enough to be my grandfather, asked me to come to his hotel room and then planted a kiss on my lips as I entered the room. Then he turned on some opera music and leaned towards me, clearly not wanting to talk about work. I fled.
One donor told me he would give $10,000 a year, but wanted me to come visit him 4 times each year to get installments because it made him feel good.
I felt.
Unclean.
I felt.
Unworthy.
I felt.
Undone.
I felt like I needed a shower.
I felt like I needed a bodyguard.
A donor placed his hand on my thigh, whispering in my ear, "You're so hot, especially post-baby."
At a conference, I saw the head of a large foundation at a bar with about 5 young women. One in particular was very intoxicated, and the CEO clearly crossed the line into sexually inappropriate and explicit language with her. He had more positional power than all of us, and so no one spoke up. We ended the outing and escorted the woman home before anything beyond talking happened.
I was soliciting the CEO of a major federation who was overly familiar, commenting on my appearance, asking about my dating life, sitting too closely, using flirtatious language, and showing clear preference that I not bring my male colleague to our meetings. This behavior continued once I received funding. I felt I needed to play along to get and continue to receive funding.
I was leading a roundtable discussion. One donor seemed really interested in our organization's work. One by one, people left, but he remained, asking questions and expressing interest. He moved chairs so that he could sit closer. He told me that he would support our work. A moment later, he said, "You know, I felt so attracted to you from the moment you walked in the room and started speaking." I ended the conversation, but later I received an email from him at 2:30 a.m. stating that he had been thinking about me, and he was so inspired by my light.
As the former ED of a national organization, I was sitting in the lobby of a hotel in Jerusalem with 2 prominent philanthropists, one our board chair. Once the introductions were over, the other philanthropist said to my board chair, nodding at me, "So, are you fucking her?" I froze, faked a laugh, and moved on to the solicitation. We didn't get it, and quite frankly, I was so relieved so that I wouldn't have to deal with this man again.
The director of a foundation made several advances, called me late at night, touched my leg, sent me expensive gifts, asked me out for drinks, made inappropriate comments about my posts and looks on Facebook. I told the people who had referred him to me, as well as several other nonprofit professionals and directors of foundations. The people who referred him to me said, "Oh yes, he has that reputation." I wondered why none of them had warned me.
There was definitely a quid pro quo for donating. I just told my boss the guy didn't want to make a donation after all. I didn't say anything because I was fearful of the negative repercussions for my organization. This guy has a lot of power in the community.
He is married to another major donor for us, so it got complicated.
During the cocktail hour at a major philanthropic event, one of the biggest philanthropists present, whom I'd only met a few moments earlier, called me over to join his group and introduced me and my organization to the group. As he was speaking and praising my work, he began massaging my neck. I froze and looked around the circle, but though his hand was clearly visible, no one seemed to be reacting. They just kept laughing at his jokes. I ducked out from under his hand and stood on the other side of the circle. He followed me there and began massaging the nape of my neck again. This time, his hand crept down my shirt. Again, not one of the other 5 donors said a word. I excused myself. A half hour later, the man again encountered me at the food table, and again, his hand was massaging my neck.
I was standing with 2 men at a conference. One asked another if he knew me, and he responded, "Well, I was trying to pick her up at the bar earlier." To which the first guy responded, "Did you tell her you'd make a gift if she made it easy for you?"
A male funder, after a couple of drinks, spent the evening lasciviously looking down the front of my modest dress. I didn't do anything. I felt like I jeopardized our funding.
Some Jewish institutions prize their donors to a degree that development staff won't speak out when inappropriate behavior occurs.
Some Jewish institutions prize their donors to a degree that no one will speak out when inappropriate behavior occurs.
My supervisor expressed empathy, helped intervene, and supported me through addressing issues with peers, but any instances with donors was shrugged off or defended.
As an intern, I told my boss what had occurred, and she laughed and said, "Well, he gave $25K today, so you must have done something right."
A potential donor made an aggressive, unwanted sexual advance at me, and I had to physically push him off while we were alone in a taxi.
The CEO of a very large Jewish institution invited me to a party for senior staff members at a conference in his hotel suite. And as the guests left, he asked me to stay to discuss a project. We were in a living room, not a bedroom. And as he was an older married man whom I had only heard good things about, I did not feel worried or nervous. I sat on a chair and he sat on the couch, but things quickly changed. He kept asking me to join him on the couch, and I kept refusing and telling him that I was comfortable where I was. He grew angry, so I got up to leave, and at the door, I stuck my hand out to shake his hand, and he got very angry and said, "You don't shake my hand, you kiss me." He tried to grab my face, but I was stronger than he was and managed to get out of that room. In the years following that incident, I was silent about it, but it did get back to me that he tried to smear my name. He was married at the time and a beloved figure in the community.
On a visit to his office, a very prominent national donor, whose name you would all know, asked me to walk across his office, locate a small statue, and describe what I saw. It was an ancient, pornographic depiction of a sex act. The donor insisted that I describe what each figure in the sculpture was doing, and kept egging me on until I finally did, just to end the harassment. At the end of the visit, he propositioned me. I felt ashamed and disgusted.
I was told it's part of the job.
Lazman hazeh, Lazman hazeh, Lazman hazeh, Lazman hazeh. We want to believe that because we are Jewish, that our institutions don't encounter such behaviors. But they do. We have work to do.
I'm sure I wasn't the only one he did this to. Together, we could have taken action. Alone, I'm not comfortable pursuing anything. It's difficult to express your concerns when there is no HR, no one you could speak to confidentially.
We lost a lot of members due to inappropriate touching by the rabbi. Sexist language was used regularly. The board members were no better. Many people told me about their experiences. I wept for them, but there was no one to tell. I called the police, talked to my local rabbinical organization, went to Human Rights Department, and finally many lawyers. They all cited ministerial exception, in which congregations are exempt from sexual harassment. This is beyond unethical. It is absolute cruelty.
My titles are rabbi and doctor. They are not sweetie, honey, or sugar. I don't care how much money you have, how many times you've donated to my community, how much older you are, or how much life experience you have.
I want a public campaign so these individuals are attuned to the discomfort and shame they're inflicting on others, because it's not part of the job.
Me too. Gam ani. Time's up. Shehecheanu v'kimanu v'higianu lazman hazeh.
Thank you. I'm Jamie Allen Black, the Executive Director of the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York. And you're going to hear from me later. I'm just going to do this transition because it's now your turn. This is your opportunity to ask questions and make comments. To do so, we're going to ask that you will line up at the microphones. There will be one microphone in each row. And everyone is not going to have time. We're not going to have time for everyone to ask their questions and make their comments. So the moderator will call on you to speak. But whether you're asking a question or making a comment, you have 1 minute. Where's Stephanie? See, time's up. So when the sign goes up, please respect other participants by following Stephanie's lead, and so we don't have to play the music to get you to stop talking. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Barbara Dobkin. Woo! Barbara is a pioneer in the Jewish community as a donor activist for programs that empower women and girls, and is one of the most visible and committed advocates for social change. Joining Barbara are 3 experts here to answer your questions. Deborah Meyer can answer your questions about the culture at large. Why this moment? Why this movement? Why these issues? Rabbi Joanna Samuels can answer your questions about workplace culture. Why have we not fixed this yet? What steps do we need to take to make lasting change? And Rabbi Mira Wasserman can answer your questions about Jewish ethics. What can Judaism offer us in our quest to create safe workplaces? And ethical workplaces. All of their bios are in your program, so I'm going to just turn it over to Barbara and the team.
Okay. Jamie suggested I start by telling you why I decided to do this tonight, but I don't think I need to do that anymore. I think it's very obvious why we're all here. We can just start by having people line up and ask questions. There are a lot of things we could say, but we're more interested in the questions that you have or what you want to say. Okay, that's real good. Come on. You have to know how it works.
Hi, I'm Rabbi Jordy Gerson. I have a question for all of you. A lot of women who, when they are harassed, end up having to sign NDAs for various reasons, non-disclosure agreements. How do you protect other women or other people that are in a vulnerable position if you have to do that for financial reasons, for professional reasons? How do you protect other women?
So I don't have a great answer to that other than to notice that the moment that we're living in right now, where women are anonymously creating documents that are calling out men, seem like the logical step of non-disclosure agreements. And so there was a document circulating in our community. There have been documents circulating in many, many different fields. A friend of mine is an attorney, and there was a lengthy one in the field of law that she works in. And, you know, what's interesting to me is how quick the backlash came against the creation of documents like that, when what's obvious, actually, is that there is no recourse by which women can protect each other than to create those kinds of documents. I would stop there, actually. Actually, I would add one thing, which is that, I'm sorry, the woman whose name I'm forgetting, who created the media men list, wrote the most powerful piece on The Cut, and it really should be actually required reading for every human being who is alive right now on this planet, because she talks about why those documents need to be created, the backlash that she received, and nevertheless, her very strong opinion that this was the right thing to do. I would also, Alana Stokeman, who many of us probably follow on Facebook and social media, wrote something also very, very powerful about someone coming to her in Yerushalayim saying like, oh God, there's a list, and like, I think I heard that someone I know is on it, and instead of saying, how can I do the work as a male ally to figure out what is going on for the women who are accusing this man, basically said, how can you shut this down right now? And her writing on this was also extremely, extremely thoughtful.
Can I add something? Going forward, I think we could do a better job if we decide communally that our institutions will not participate in pressuring women and other victims to have to sign. So if we had a fund where we could guarantee women who made complaints would have legal representation so they could see their complaints through, they wouldn't feel the pressure to sign. So that doesn't help women who have been pressured into signing already, but this is something that we can address proactively moving forward.
Hi. Hi, Nancy Kaufman, National Council of Jewish Women. So I came from the other world, the secular world, about 25 years ago to the Jewish world. I had come from democratic politics in Massachusetts, which was an Irish bastion of men. So I wasn't too surprised, I guess, when I got to the Jewish community and had younger women in the Federation coming to me all the time. I think that what I feel particularly concerned about and enraged about, quite frankly, is that it's taken us so long as a Jewish community to understand we, after all, are like everyone else. So I have two questions. One, I guess, Deborah, I'd ask you, are we seeing a generational shift at all in terms of my generation versus a younger generation? That's part one. Part two, I've been hearing a lot from some of my Israeli colleagues, because some of you know we're doing a major research project right now in Israel, that it hasn't quite caught on yet. And I'm just wondering if those of you working in Israel and how this is going to play out in Israel, and since we have an upcoming symposium, I have a feeling this may be an issue that comes up. So one is why it's taken so long, and I'm done.
Great. Thanks. I feel like what I'm very heartened by what I've been seeing within the people, among the people we connect to as Moving Traditions, in terms of the younger educators who are coming into our circles. And, you know, it's a small pool, but in this small pool, I see a really different understanding of gender and identity and roles. And so I'm hoping that extends to power dynamics and sexuality as well. And I would say that it's not something we should just sort of passively wait for. Obviously, we're very committed to thinking about what do we do, how do we help the next generation, those who are teens now and rising young adults, how do we help them understand what it means to be in relationship, what it means to have power, what it means to have respect, and what it means to love, and the difference between those things. And I think that I think is incumbent upon us as a Jewish community. So I do see some changes, but not enough. Oh, and working with boys too. Yes, we work with not only with girls but with boys. We have to have conversations with boys. Rabbi Daniel Brenner here just wrote a piece that was in the JTA. We have to help boys also have these conversations. It's not enough to empower girls and women, which we obviously need to continue to do. We have to help boys have these questions because, it's confusing for them. I mean, imagine being a kid today, a teen today, and thinking, am I, because I'm male, necessarily someone who's going to harass somebody? What does it mean, in my life and my relationships? So really helping parse that. They have the right to ask that question, and we have the obligation to help them explore that.
I would add to that and say that many of us are part of intergenerational settings, and those are called workplaces. And the fact is that often it is the younger employees who are the least listened to, the least respected, the least likely to be involved in so-called important conversations about the culture and strategy of the organization. And in the work that Shifra and Dee and Barbara and I did together at Advancing Women Professionals, one of the things that we always said is that change can happen anywhere in an organization. And something that organizational leaders need to do is let go of some of these conversations and let staff members make these issues discussed and discussable, and give them the arena by which they can bring their opinions and their knowledge. They can create some experiments within their own workplaces to test out these ideas. And that the good news for those of us who sit as organizational leaders is, like, we don't have to come up with all the answers, actually. Like, lots of people are very smart and actually maybe even smarter than us. And I would say particularly for younger women and men coming into our organizations who really are thinking about this in new ways, and the extent to which we can let their voices not just be live, but actually that we ourselves might think like, oh, actually I could learn something. I could unlearn something that is holding this organization back from being the place that it needs to be on these or any of the other issues that come up.
The Israel issue? Anyone comment on that? No.
So it's great to follow up, Joanna, on that comment. Oh, I'm Shifra Bronsnick. And I guess the big question that I have, and it was really amplified by this unbelievable array of stories, but actually not unbelievable, Joanna, to you and I, or to Barbara, or to any of us who've been working in this, actually really believable. And the only thing that's unbelievable is the complacency that has kept this system in place. So my question is, I've recently heard that there are a number of funders, many of whom have not really been involved in this space, who are eager to move forward on initiatives that will help deal with these issues. So my question is, how could we help make sure that at the center of these decisions are the people most affected by the challenges that we've just heard? How could we make sure that the people who've been abused by donors, philanthropists, board members, and CEOs are actually the ones who determine where resources go for this issue, not just receiving resources, but getting the resources? And how could we make sure that this does not become an empty top-down initiative to show that we're doing something, but that we actually do something?
Well, maybe you could help. Maybe you could help with that, Sheffer. Maybe one step is those people who are thinking about putting this money together might want to work with, you and Joanna and Dee Dee and those who've been working on these issues for a while. Might be a good start. And because the question is, how do you find those young women who, and maybe not so young women, who have felt the need to be anonymous? How do we create safety for people to actually say their names and say it happened to me? And so I think it's a great question. And it's one thing that we could really have a conversation about.
I just want to add, yes and yes and yes. And I'm also concerned about the other people who work in our workplaces who aren't professionals. So I'm thinking about office staff. I'm thinking about the people who come in and clean and alone in our buildings. So I think we need a very, very broad array of people in the conversation.
Yeah, I want to add to both of the things that were said and say that I've been a student of social change for a while now. And my experience with social change is that you can't do social change for other people, right? Like it actually has to start with yourself. And so I appreciate the enthusiasm around this issue from all of the corners that it's coming from. And I also, and maybe this is just the kind of stubborn feminist in me, but I would say and what I know is that unless we understand how we are complicit in systems of structural inequity, we cannot dismantle those systems because we become one big part of the problem, and we now have given ourselves like this carbon offset to go like, oh no, I get it now and I'm going to help everyone else do it. And I feel like that just never works, and actually it often compounds the problem. So I'll just give you an example, which is that I am very, very, very blessed to work in a very diverse, multiracial organization. It's diverse in every way. And the opportunity to put myself in a position of listening and learning has been one of the greatest blessings of my life and my leadership. And I hope in some way is slowly leading us to a place where there's more openness and honesty in our communications. But it's been very important for me not to say, I'm leading the charge here. I'm really not leading the charge. I'm taking in the charge in a big way.
I'm Steve Rackett. I'm the president of the Genesis Prize Foundation. And as a foundation this year, we are going to be listening and learning about this important issue. I want to thank the Jewish Women Foundation. This has been an extraordinarily powerful program for me personally and for everybody in this room. I typically ask the following question: what does success look like? I'm not going to ask that question. But a year from now, if we were to come together, what would progress look like?
I always have something to say. This is very hard. Oh, excuse me. No, I think in some ways some of that's been addressed. I think, look, I mean, I sit through there and I could probably name some of the people who were being accused, and I would like to out every single one of them, and I'd like to find some way that some of that happens. But I think that if we begin addressing the underlying issues in our community, I mean, and unfortunately, these are very basic things. The lack of mobility for women to the top. I mean, it's everything. And we have to make safe spaces for people to be able to work and speak out, and that's enough.
in a year, will there be a place, will there be an opportunity for women who have been harassed to bring their case and to be heard, to have lawyers who will be available to them to pursue their cases? In a year, will people stand up, upstand, as people like to say, and speak out when inappropriate behavior, when that guy is massaging that neck? That was like, oh, will someone else say something? So will we as a community begin to not only amplify the voices and the terrible stories, but also begin to take responsibility for preventing more from happening? Will we have more conversations with people in college and people in high school and people in middle school about what it means to relate to each other with respect and what it means to see each other as a human being and not as an object to have power over or to dominate or to possess? I think, hard to measure, but I like to see that.
I would add a few things to what Deborah said. The first is that in every workplace that these issues are discussed and discussable, I would say that funders take responsibility for two things. First of all, the terrible power imbalance between donors and professionals that underlies so much of this, and the fact that lay leaders are in positions to make such critical determinations about professional advancement in our community without their own biases being examined and checked. Another piece that's really important is having sturdy outside mechanisms within organizational life where even the most beloved person, even the biggest donor, even the best rabbi on the planet, if that person is a toxic harasser in our community, there needs to be a process that will investigate that, and if that person is guilty, have them exit the community, professionally or however. And the third is, I think we need to do an audit of who we are holding up as experts in our community and as the voices of power in our community. And as a rabbi, I can tell you that I still feel like I'm swimming upstream in terms of being taken seriously as a thought leader, being taken seriously as an important person in our community and as an important rabbinic voice. And so when we created a pledge to ask men not to speak on all male panels, it wasn't because we had some fetish about all male panels. I mean, panels are always, they're not usually very good anyway, but because basically, except this, so good. Because what we were trying to get at is that the community needs to see women in positions of thought leadership in order for women to be honored, in order for women to advance, in order to shift the narrative around who's an important person in our community. And so that would be another outcome that I would like to see, is an end to this. I'm so sick of getting these email blasts with 9 male voices on it and feeling oh my God, this is so disrespectful and it is such a poor showing of our community. That's what I'll say for now.
I want to think about what's happening in our synagogues and in our schools. I want the places that we go for meaning and sacredness to be places that we can bring these stories, where we can trust rabbis to hear them and sit in our pain, where we can trust our rabbis. That would be great, right? I want us to look at our tradition and how our tradition perpetuates imbalances of power. I want to look at how our daily prayer teaches us the virtues of being silent, which is oftentimes a virtue and a guard against ethical trespasses, but sometimes is not. So I want to look for liturgies that teach us the sacredness of speaking out. A lot of us as women are taught that it's important to be quiet. A lot of us as Jews are taught that it is a virtue to be quiet, and sometimes that's true. But some of our traditions celebrate the voices of protest and rebuke. We have a language and an ethics around upstanding. It's called tochacha, or rebuke, that we don't talk about, we don't teach. So one easy, low-hanging fruit is for you to go to shul and hear your rabbi talking about the heroism of people who are speaking out and how that is in keeping with the best, holiest teaching of our tradition.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, thank you, everyone, for bringing this up for the Jewish Women's Foundation. My name is Lonnie Santo. I'm Executive Director of Footsteps. One of what I want to hit on the community and congregational aspect of this, because one of the things that we're struggling with at Footsteps, being a combination of a community building and a social service agency, is the lines, and I think that almost everyone on this panel has something to add to this, between how do you create not only safe but comfortable and accessible places for everyone, and at the same time respect those boundaries of confidentiality that for those of us who work at social service agencies we are bound by. How do we help other people be warned while we also can't, because of social work ethics, do that?
We're going to have a few people doubting because Jamie gave me this. Okay, so let's, yeah, go ahead and let's get a few people.
I'll be quick.
You don't have to be quick, just.
I
don't think it's on.
Okay. I'm Amy Saltzman with the Jewish Women's Foundation in Chicago, and as I was hearing the stories, the biggest things that was going through my mind were we had brought up, or someone had brought up complacency. But the next thing that is thinking of in my mind is fear, and especially working in the Jewish community, whether you're a funder, whether you work in a synagogue, you're working for an organization that you love and that you care about, and how do we overcome that fear of embarrassing or making your organization seem complacent or have a worse reputation in the community when it's an organization that you feel so close to and love so much?
Next, let's get a couple of comments and then we'll see what we can do with them.
Rabbi Mary Zamor, I'm the Executive Director of the Women's Rabbinic Network. I know it was addressed in part, but it wasn't said outright, so I want to say it outright. The reason why older men are harassing younger women in the Jewish community is because the men are in powers of position. And many people ask me all the time if this is just, we're going to somehow age out of this problem. And all you have to do is look at sexual assault on college campuses to understand that we're not. The process is broken, and that's why the lists come into play, and that's why metoo comes into play, because women have to go around the process. And until we're willing to fix the process, and until our institutions and congregations are willing to do the institutional teshuvah, true repentance, and really looking at their part and where we are today, nothing's going to change. We can try to change the individuals, we can try to change ourselves, but honestly, we have to look at our institutions, and they have to be able to say that they've played a part.
I'm wondering,
What recourse?
Who are you?
Elisa Phillips.
I'm just a person.
I'm wondering it's not really working.
What recourse do we have against ministerial exemption?
Yeah. All right. Okay, let's keep going.
Hi, I'm Sari Steinberg with Sacred Spaces. I know more of you by name and email address than in person, so please introduce yourselves if I know you or even if I don't. I just wanted to offer another answer to the question of what do we want to see happening in the next year. And what we're working on is working with organizations, with institutions, to make sure everybody's got a policy in place, a policy that's tailored to your community and to the culture. And as the policy develops, it's also involving everyone in the community, or as many stakeholders as possible. And we really want to see there be recourse, there be people being aware that there are limits, there are boundaries, and respecting them and understanding what to do if they're crossed.
I'm Amy Stone. I'm one of the founders of Lilith Magazine. And when I was hearing all of these horrible examples of old geezers in their boxer shorts, I want to say to you all, it's not that these guys are Hugh Hefner relics. When they were growing up, it was the height of the women's movement that inspired us to fight the patriarchy, and it seems it's still, people have just suddenly discovered, oh, there's a patriarchy out there. But even if these guys are old enough to be your fathers or your grandfathers, it's not acceptable. And when they were young men at the height of the women's movement, it was not acceptable then either.
I want to thank everybody for this wonderful, wonderful night. And I think what I want to say, my name is Jerry Cattison. I was a healthcare professional. I'm finally back to work after 7 years, because when I turned to my rabbi in New York City, just so humiliated, hopefully I'll be writing my story, his comment was, well, are you crazy? You know, did you ask for it? Why did that happen? So I left that synagogue. I lived in New Jersey for 25 years, raising kids, and been a member of a wonderful synagogue. So now I go to another very prestigious synagogue. And this is just eating at me and eating at me. And my life is just going in a downward spiral with the humiliation and shame. And I had been a very public person, and that rabbi said, you know, again, what do you want me to do about it? And I said, well, you preach social justice. Isn't there somebody? Because this impacted me not only financially, physically, emotionally. And then again, another young rabbi who said, I don't know what you expect us to do. So between rabbinical schools, educating rabbis, but just being able to publicly say this, I'd like to be part of the solution, you know, because it humiliated me even further. And after thousands and thousands of dollars to lawyers, everybody again, you know, well, you're frantic, you must have asked for this. So, you know, I hope to get justice for myself and to help others. So thank you so much.
Good evening. My name is Colin Weil. I'm the executive director of B'nai Jeshurun, and starting last summer, I was invited to join a cohort related to this program tonight, Gamini, and I thank Martin Kammeter for inviting us. Even before Harvey Weinstein broke, that we started this conversation, particularly around development. And at BJ, we are moving forward this cohort, and I see some colleagues from other synagogues who are part of it. We are adding language into our employee manual that addresses not just harassment, but respectful behavior. What is acceptable, not just what you can't do. We're adding it to the bylaws of the board and the board agreements, and we're going to create a community agreement that the membership will commit to. We're going to do this very publicly and transparently. I'm very inspired by this program tonight, and I'm going to carry this in with that. And I'm offering to the community that we're going to be transparent in how we move this forward, and we invite others to join this initiative, to come and learn with us and help move this out, because I think it has to be grassroots, and we have to recognize that many of our organizations are bound by membership, and members, there is a relationship. It should be two-way, and there should be agreements and expectations.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Mandel. I'm the executive director of J-Pills Magazine. And you know, so much of what allows this kind of behavior to continue is that women are shamed or afraid to be silent. And then every once in a while, you have an incredibly brave, strong woman like Danielle Barron of the Jewish Journal, who wrote about Avi Shavid very, very clearly. He did not deny the allegations, and yet, with this very, very public accounting of what happened, the 92nd Street Y invited him to speak. And my question is, how do we, you know, if breaking the silence is not sufficient, if publicly holding someone accountable for their behavior is not sufficient. What do we do so that icons are not held in such great esteem that they can do anything they want, and they can be called to account and still be allowed to literally take the stage?
Hi, I'm Julie Sisman, and I also want to offer a piece of a vision for where we could be in a year. In a year at this gathering, I'd like to see more men in the room, because we will not solve this problem unless men are hearing the stories that they have no idea happen. My husband didn't even know that I hold my keys in my hand when I walk home because I feel unsafe until about 3 months ago. And we can't make the change if the men aren't holding themselves accountable with the women. And so that's what I'd like to see in a year.
Hi, I'm Lisa Capinuto. I think in terms of action, I don't know if anyone knows this, but this week in London there was a men-only dinner that was exposed in the Financial Times. And I read today that as a result, I think 4 or 5 charities have given back donations of over $1 million, and the board chair of the largest Jewish high school in London was removed within 24 hours of the dinner because he was one of the sponsors. So I think that those kinds of actions will have consequences. So I think that if we are brave enough to do that, then it's not going to carry on. And the organization has been disbanded as well because of. It was called the President's Club. It wasn't a Jewish organization, but it was a men's kind of supper club that raised millions of dollars for charity. I mean, a children's hospital gave back $1 million donation. Just said.
I know I talked a lot already, but I just, thank you, want to step back to the Jewish ethics piece and how do we bring that culture change. And, I feel like Moving Traditions is doing that work, and it's about helping to unpack that we are all inherently sexist. And it's not because we're jerks, it's because this is the culture that we have all been raised in. And so for women who sit here tonight are profoundly feminist, and we know what that means, and we still struggle with all of the messaging that's coming at us left and right. And boys are still taught with their most liberal parents that they need money, and money and sex are what create power. And it is all over. Debbie started the evening with the names of the women in our tradition who are raped and assaulted and marginalized. And how are we teaching our Judaism here going forward? To the degree that there are so many rabbis in the room, there's so many educators in the room. Are we going to teach Parshat HaShavua to our kids and not say, yes, it's the men who God calls Hineni, who responds to God with Hineni? Where are the women? And let's look at it from an educational standpoint, the liturgy you're talking about, the text that we can look at differently, and come to all of us to say there is an inherent sexism. It's okay, and let's make the change. And then all the policies too.
Thank you all. I'm sorry. I mean, we could go on all night with this. I just want everybody to have, and then we'll give it back to you.
I think it's shocking to hear the stories, and it's not shocking to hear the stories, and it is shocking that it's taken so long, and it's heartening that our voices are being raised and that we're looking at and we're talking about what to do, and that we're shaming people into better behavior. And I just want to say that I think another piece that we could look at, if funders are putting funding into thinking about how to help make some changes and make some healing systemically, I think funding sexual harassment training for Jewish organizations across the country and making that available not just in New York but across the country would be an amazing help, because it's expensive. And I'm telling you that we have had a sexual harassment policy since we started our organization. I'm learning too. We have never done a training until next week. Next week we'll have our first training. And why did it take so long? So it took speaking up for us to think about how do we each change, what we can do and how we relate within our organizations.
I would add just a little proviso to that, which is that like NBC News had a sexual harassment policy, as did I'm sure like a lot of these other companies, and so yeah, like whatever. I mean, everyone has a sexual harassment policy. Like, great, everyone needs to have policies, but not having policies is not the problem. And people, you know, like pledge for this, pledge for that, like blah blah blah. Everyone can do all of that, but it's like a placeholder for actually doing the work, right? And the actual work happens when people understand where they sit in the system, where their blind spots are, where their places of power and agency are, and those are the places where we're doing the work. And I would say that if the funding community wants to get behind this issue, well, we know that there's a pay gap in our community between men and women because guess what? There's a pay gap between men and women in every profession in this country. And so what a strong signal it would send to women to think that the funders, these people who are in so much power that we're so afraid of, that when they assault and harass us, as we heard before, we can't even say anything because we need the donation and also we don't want to be that person. How powerful would it be if those funders got together and said, we are funding every organization to do a salary audit and to help you make things right in your organization when you find out, actually, that women are being paid less than men. That's my recommendation.
A quick recommendation is, in my own experience, no one can do this internally in their own organization. We are kidding ourselves if we think individual organizations can do this. We need to work together to make something outside where any story can be told, and there will be people there who can listen, whose paycheck doesn't depend on how they receive that story. The other thing I want to say is, like, this is just the beginning. There is so much work. This is going to take a long time, a lot of money, a lot of people, and we can't do it as volunteers. This is paid work to make this happen. And I'm just mindful of what we're reading and the Torah reading. You know, it's just a few short weeks and Pharaoh falls, right? And then we keep reading the story. There's so many details to attend to in how you make a life of holiness, even when the tyrants fall. That's just the beginning. So thank you for being here. Thank you so much for inviting everybody in.
Thank you. I have a commitment to get us all out of here by 8 o'clock, promise. I hate to be late. So we see this evening also as a beginning. It's a first step where Jewish communal professionals and donors, volunteers, lay leaders, staff members, philanthropists can sit together, contemplate this topic, and have our questions answered. And together, think about what the next steps can be. And we heard some tonight. So in the Torah portion this week, Beshalach, the children of Israel step into the Red Sea and are redeemed from slavery. It was a time of upheaval and uncertainty. And yet, we know that Miriam, with a timbrel in her hand, believed in a bright future, believed in building again. And she led the community in hope and song and strategized with other communal leaders about how to move forward. Tonight, we've continued to follow her lead. In your materials, you have a large postcard. This is the call to action part, people. Okay, you have a large postcard. If you have an idea about what those steps could be, if you want to see something specific in the Code of Ethics, if there's anything else you want to share, write it on the card. There's a basket in the back, and you can leave it on your way out. Also, if you don't want to do that and something comes to you in the middle of the night and you said, I wish I'd said that, send it to me. Send it to anyone, and we will get it because we're all in this together and we want to hear everyone's voices. Hold on. Sorry. Moving. Next week, a group of us from New York will be going to Washington, D.C. to speak with other organizations that are working on these issues. So I want to take your words with us. So your suggestions, your words, your concerns will come with me and the great Martin Kaminer, who's the father of this movement. We will go to D.C. and your voices will be heard. So this is not the last time your voice will be heard. What are you raising? Oh, the basket, a basket. This is not the last time you'll have your voice heard, but it is a first time, and we welcome everyone to participate. So, before we close, please join me in thanking Naomi Less for her beautiful music. All of tonight's readers and experts, and of course, Barbara Dobkin, of course. And we want to thank all of the organizational partners who are listed in your program who came forward and said, I want in, and actually committed to take this work back to their organizations and do something inside their organizations to make this situation become more alleviated. We deeply thank the Cornell Weinstein Family Foundation, without which this program would not have been possible. So, thank you for being here, and thank you for caring about this topic. If this evening has been inspiring to you, we hope you'll get more involved. The Jewish Women's Foundation is working to move the marker on issues facing women, and we need your voices. Next week, on January 30th, we have an event, Change Powered by Women, inspired by Jewish values. It's co-sponsored by us and Upstart, and it's where you can hear about Jewish women social entrepreneurs, rock star women doing excellent work in our community and beyond. And additional information about that is in a flyer on your seat. End of PSA. And I would like, and there's, I know what that is. I wrote that down up here. Jewish Women's Archives has Archiving Me Too. And it's jwi.org/metoo. These cards are outside. So when you say, how can we collect more stories? Send your stories here. Tell people that we're collecting stories and we want to hear from you. Jewish Women's Archives has generously offered to take care of our stories and keep them in trust, and they can be anonymous. And now, thank you.
With all these firsts that are happening on the shoulders of many firsts that have happened before tonight, let us sing the Shechianu together as we step into, as many did, into that sea in the Parshat B'Shalach. We sing together, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Ruach HaOlam Shehecheanu V'kiyemanu V'higianu L'zman hazeh. Na 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 na. V'higianu l'zman hazeh.